Dr. Natalie Frost had spent 7 years perfecting the art of invisibility, and the Sterling Memorial Library at Westfield University was the perfect place to disappear. When Navy SEALs finally kicked down her reading room door at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, the only thing more shocking than their arrival was discovering that the quiet librarian they'd come for could have killed them all before they cleared the threshold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountains of Montana stretched endlessly beyond the university's Gothic windows, their peaks crowned with snow that never quite melted, even in summer. Westfield University sat like a fortress of learning in the valley, its red brick buildings and ivy-covered walls housing some of the most advanced research in the country. And in the heart of it all, behind mahogany shelves lined with centuries of human knowledge, worked a woman who carried secrets that could reshape everything people thought they knew about the War on Terror. Dr. Natalie Frost was 38, though she carried herself with the careful economy of movement that made people guess she was younger. Her dark auburn hair was always pulled back in a simple bun secured with what appeared to be an ordinary tortoiseshell clip, but was actually a titanium alloy strong enough to be used as a weapon if necessary. Her gray eyes, framed by wire-rimmed glasses that she didn't actually need, held a depth that made students think twice before approaching her with frivolous requests. She dressed the part perfectly. Cardigans over modest blouses, comfortable flats, and a leather satchel that looked like it had seen decades of academic conferences. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., Natalie arrived at the Sterling Memorial Library, her footsteps echoing through the empty corridors with precision that would have impressed a drill sergeant. She carried 2 cups of coffee, one from the campus cafe, and another from a thermos she prepared at home, using beans that were imported through channels most people couldn't access. The difference was subtle, but the homemade brew contained a specific blend of South American varieties that helped maintain alertness during long surveillance operations. Students and faculty knew her as the head of special collections, the woman who managed the university's rarest manuscripts and classified government documents. She had a reputation for being brilliant but intimidating, the kind of librarian who could locate a 15th century illuminated manuscript in under 5 minutes, but would stare down undergraduates who tried to bring food into the reading room. What they didn't know was that her ability to track down obscured texts came from years of training in intelligence gathering and data analysis that most civilians would never comprehend. The Sterling Memorial Library's special collections occupied the entire 4th floor, accessible only by keycard and biometric scanner disguised as a simple security measure. Natalie had personally overseen the installation of both systems, though the true extent of their capabilities was known only to her. The scanners didn't just read fingerprints. They performed full biometric analysis that could identify individuals from classified databases spanning multiple government agencies. Her daily routine appeared mundane to outside observers. She cataloged new acquisitions, assisted graduate students with research, and maintained correspondence with libraries and archives around the world. But every keystroke she made was deliberate. Every email she sent served multiple purposes, and every conversation she had was analyzed for intelligence value before she responded. The rare books vault in the library's sub-basement was where Natalie kept her most dangerous secrets. Officially, it housed temperature-controlled storage for manuscripts too valuable to display. Unofficially, it contained equipment that had no business existing on a university campus. Behind a false wall that appeared to be nothing more than original stone masonry was a room that would have impressed Pentagon security specialists. Inside were 3 encrypted satellite communication systems, each connected to different global networks that officially didn't exist. Computer servers hummed quietly in climate-controlled cabinets, processing data streams from sources that ranged from academic databases to classified intelligence feeds. The room's walls were lined with Faraday cage materials that blocked all electronic surveillance, making it invisible to any scanning technology short of physical intrusion. Most impressive was the archive itself. Thousands of documents, photographs, and digital files that detailed classified operations spanning 2 decades. military service records for personnel who had been officially erased, financial transactions between government contractors and foreign entities, communications between high-ranking officials discussing operations that violated multiple international treaties. It was an insurance policy built over 7 years of careful collection, a guarantee that certain people would leave her alone as long as she remained invisible. Natalie's transformation from Navy SEAL to academic librarian hadn't been accidental. 7 years ago, she'd been Lieutenant Commander Natalie Frost, call sign Raven, one of the most decorated female operators in SEAL Team Delta's history. She'd completed 47 classified missions across 4 continents, specializing in intelligence gathering and asset extraction in hostile territory. Her team had been responsible for operations so sensitive that their existence was compartmentalized beyond top-secret clearance levels. The scar along her left shoulder blade, hidden beneath conservative clothing, was a souvenir from her final mission, a bullet that had come close enough to end her career and her life. But the real wound had been discovering that someone within her own command structure was selling intelligence to foreign buyers, using SEAL Team Delta operations as cover for activities that had nothing to do with national security. When she tried to report her suspicions through proper channels, she'd been told to focus on her assigned duties and leave policy decisions to her superiors. When team members started dying in operations that felt more like executions than tactical missions, she realized that the corruption went higher than she had imagined. The choice had been simple: participate in activities that violated everything she'd sworn to protect, or disappear entirely. The transition required skills that weren't taught in any SEAL training program, but that every operator learned eventually. How to create a new identity that would survive casual investigation, how to establish credentials in a field completely unrelated to military service, how to build a life so ordinary that no one would look twice at the person living it. Her academic credentials were real, earned through accelerated programs while she was still active duty. Her doctoral dissertation on information warfare in medieval manuscripts had been both genuine scholarship and perfect cover for her real expertise in modern intelligence gathering. The job at Westfield had come through legitimate academic channels, though her references had been provided by people who understood the importance of giving certain individuals new lives. For 7 years, the system had worked perfectly. Dr. Natalie Frost, the brilliant but reclusive librarian, had built a reputation based on scholarly achievement and professional competence. She published papers on historical research methodology, attended academic conferences, and maintained relationships with colleagues who saw her as nothing more than a dedicated academic with an unusually broad knowledge base. But on this particular Tuesday, as she was reviewing acquisition requests for a collection of World War II intelligence documents, her encrypted communication system activated with a priority signal she hadn't heard in years. The alert was subtle, a barely audible tone that could have been mistaken for the library's heating system, but it sent adrenaline surging through her bloodstream like ice water. The message was transmitted in a code that only 12 people in the world were supposed to know, and most of them were dead. It came from Danny Rodriguez, her former squadmate, transmitted from coordinates that put him somewhere in Eastern Europe. The message was brief and terrifying. Package compromised. Raven needed for immediate extraction. Time critical. Natalie stared at the screen, her mind automatically calculating the implications. Danny wouldn't have used that frequency unless he was facing elimination-level danger. The fact that he'd specifically requested her meant that whatever had gone wrong was connected to their shared past, and the timing couldn't be coincidental. As she reached for the secure phone to respond, the library's main entrance alarms began sounding. Not the gentle chimes that indicated normal after-hours access, but the harsh electronic shriek that meant the building's security perimeter had been breached by multiple unauthorized individuals moving with tactical precision. Through the special collection's bulletproof windows, Natalie could see black SUVs surrounding the library's main entrances. Men in tactical gear were taking positions around the building's perimeter, moving with the coordinated efficiency of a military operation. This wasn't campus security responding to a simple break-in. This was a federal raid planned and executed by people who knew exactly what they were looking for. Her hands moved with muscle memory, activating the vault's emergency protocols. Sensitive data began deleting itself from servers while backup copies transferred to secure off-site locations. Physical documents fed into an industrial shredder that reduced classified materials to particles too small for reconstruction. The process would take 12 minutes to complete, and she probably had less than 5 before they reached her floor. The sound of boots on marble stairs echoed through the building's central atrium, too many footsteps moving too quickly for normal law enforcement procedures. These weren't police officers serving a warrant. They were operators conducting a military-style assault on an academic institution, which meant someone had authorized actions that violated multiple federal laws. Natalie removed her glasses and let her hair down, small changes that altered her silhouette enough to confuse facial recognition software. Her cardigan came off, revealing a fitted black shirt that allowed for better range of movement. The tortoiseshell hair clip went into her pocket, easily accessible if she needed an improvised weapon. In 30 seconds, she had transformed from harmless librarian to someone prepared for combat. The tactical team reached the 4th floor faster than she had anticipated, their equipment including electronic lockpicking devices that bypassed the biometric scanners in under 2 minutes. Professional-grade gear operated by people who'd clearly studied the library's security systems in advance. As the special collections door opened, Natalie was seated calmly at her desk, hands visible, appearing every inch the surprised academic who had no idea why armed agents were invading her workplace. Dr. Natalie Frost, the team leader announced, though it wasn't a question. She was a woman in her 40s wearing a tailored suit beneath tactical armor, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. "I'm Agent Susan Clark, Naval Intelligence. We need to discuss your expertise in classified document analysis." Natalie kept her expression carefully neutral, the face of an academic who had no idea why federal agents were treating her library like a hostile compound. But her mind was cataloging every detail. 6 operators in the room, 2 more stationed in the hallway, standard tactical formation for building clearance. Their equipment was military grade, not law enforcement issue, which meant this operation had been authorized at levels far above normal interagency cooperation. "I'm afraid there's been some mistake," Natalie said, her voice carrying exactly the right blend of confusion and indignation. "This is an academic library. We don't handle classified materials without proper clearance and documentation." Agent Clark smiled with the practiced patience of someone who'd heard similar denials before. She gestured to one of her operators who produced a tablet displaying satellite imagery of the Sterling Memorial Library. But these weren't ordinary photographs. They showed thermal signatures, electromagnetic readings, and structural analysis that revealed far more than any civilian should possess about the building's interior. "Dr. Frost, our sensors indicate the presence of electronic equipment in this facility that exceeds anything required for standard library operations." Clark swiped through the images, each one revealing another layer of hidden technology: encrypted communication arrays, military-grade servers, and electromagnetic shielding that would be impressive in a Pentagon facility. The images were more detailed than Natalie had expected, which meant someone with serious resources had been watching the library for months. Satellite surveillance, electronic reconnaissance, and what appeared to be ground-penetrating radar analysis. This wasn't a random investigation triggered by suspicious activity. This was a comprehensive intelligence operation targeting her specifically. "I maintain digital archives for historical research," Natalie replied, standing slowly and keeping her hands visible. "Some of our collections require specialized storage and climate control systems. Perhaps that's what your instruments detected." One of the tactical operators approached the vault entrance, running a handheld scanner across the walls. The device immediately began registering signatures that had nothing to do with climate control: hardened steel reinforcement, electronic locks, and the telltale electromagnetic signature of active surveillance countermeasures. He looked back at Clark and nodded confirmation. Clark's expression hardened slightly. "Dr. Frost, I'm going to ask you once more, and I'd advise you to consider your answer carefully. What exactly are you storing in the restricted areas of this facility?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Natalie realized she was facing a decision point that would determine whether she maintained her cover or revealed capabilities that could never be hidden again. Behind the false wall, her systems were still running their emergency protocols, deleting files and transferring others to secure locations. but the physical evidence of her true identity couldn't be erased so easily. "I think," Natalie said carefully, "that you already know the answer to that question." The admission changed the dynamic in the room instantly. The tactical operators shifted from containment positions to active threat assessment, their hands moving closer to weapons that had been held at ready but not aimed. Clark herself stepped back slightly, creating distance that would allow her to respond if the situation escalated. "Lieutenant Commander Natalie Frost," Clark said, using her former rank and real name. "Call sign Raven, SEAL Team Delta. 7 years off the grid, presumed dead by most people who knew she existed." The words hit like physical blows, each one stripping away another layer of the identity she'd built. Natalie felt the familiar sensation of operational exposure, the moment when careful planning met unexpected reality and forced improvisation became the only option for survival. "SEAL Team Delta was disbanded," Natalie replied. "All records sealed, personnel reassigned or discharged. There is no Lieutenant Commander Frost." Clark pulled out a classified file folder, its cover marked with security clearances that made its possession by anyone outside specific government agencies a federal crime. Inside were photographs that Natalie recognized, mission reports from operations she'd led, personnel evaluations written in her own hand, and satellite imagery of locations where she'd operated undercover so deep that their existence was compartmentalized beyond top secret levels. "There's a situation developing, and frankly, you're the only operator with the specific skill set we need to handle it." Natalie studied Clark's face, looking for the tells that would indicate deception or misdirection. The woman's body language suggested sincerity, but in the intelligence community, sincerity was just another tool for manipulation. The timing of this approach, coming so soon after Danny's distress signal, created too many coincidences for comfort.
"I don't operate anymore," Natalie said. "I analyze historical documents and maintain library collections. That's my entire world now." Clark nodded toward the vault entrance, where her technical specialist was now using more sophisticated equipment to penetrate the false wall's concealment. "Your entire world includes communication systems capable of reaching anywhere on the planet, servers processing real-time intelligence feeds, and archives containing classified information that could compromise ongoing operations if it fell into the wrong hands." The technical specialist's equipment was working faster than Natalie had anticipated. Within minutes, he'd located the hidden access panel and was attempting to bypass her electronic locks. The systems would resist for perhaps 10 more minutes before their security protocols were breached, at which point her 7 years of careful invisibility would end permanently. "We know about Danny Rodriguez," Clark said quietly. "SEAL Team Delta operative, captured during an unauthorized mission in Eastern Europe. He's being held by a group that specializes in extracting information from military personnel. His captors have connections to people who would pay substantial sums for intelligence about classified U.S. operations." The mention of Danny's name confirmed what Natalie had already suspected. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had been monitoring communications between former SEAL Team Delta members, waiting for the right moment to activate assets that were supposed to be permanently retired. The question was whether Clark represented legitimate government interests or something more sinister. "Who authorized this operation?" Natalie asked. Clark hesitated for just a moment, a micro-expression that suggested the question touched on information she wasn't entirely comfortable sharing. "Joint Chiefs Special Operations Command, compartmentalized above normal intelligence channels, the kind of authorization that comes with executive oversight." The explanation sounded plausible, but Natalie had learned to trust her instincts about people who claimed to represent official interests. There were too many agencies operating with overlapping jurisdictions and competing agendas. Too many operations that were authorized by people who had their own reasons for wanting certain problems solved quietly. "And if I refuse?" Natalie asked. Clark's expression became sympathetic, but her tone remained professional. "Dr. Frost, you've built an impressive life here. Academic tenure, research grants, and colleagues who respect your expertise. It would be unfortunate if circumstances forced that life to become complicated. The threat was delivered with bureaucratic politeness, but its implications were crystal clear. Cooperation would allow her to maintain her civilian identity. Refusal would result in exposure that would destroy everything she'd built and potentially put her back in the crosshairs of people who had reasons to want her dead. Behind the false wall, her systems completed their emergency protocols with a soft chime that only she could hear. Critical data had been secured, physical evidence had been destroyed, and backup copies of essential information had been transferred to locations that would remain secure even if this facility was completely compromised. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. Clark checked her watch, a military-style timepiece that suggested she maintained habits from her own operational background. 12 hours. We'll return tomorrow morning with transport to the staging area. Your choice, but Danny Rodriguez doesn't have much time. As the tactical team prepared to leave, Clark handed Natalie a secure communication device. "If you decide to help, use this to contact our operations center. The mission briefing will be provided en route." After they were gone, Natalie stood alone in the violated sanctity of her special collections room. The false wall had been breached, but not fully explored. Her cover had been blown, but not completely destroyed, and her carefully constructed life hung in the balance of a decision that would define everything that came next. She walked to the window overlooking the campus quad, where students moved between classes with the casual confidence of people who believed their biggest problems involved midterm exams and social relationships. For 7 years, she'd been part of that world, contributing to the pursuit of knowledge and the preservation of human understanding. But in her secure vault, Danny Rodriguez's distress signal continued to repeat on frequencies that most people didn't know existed, a reminder that some debts could never be fully paid and some promises lasted longer than the wars that created them.
Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Natalie spent the night in her vault, surrounded by the electronic heartbeat of systems that had kept her alive and invisible for 7 years. The Sterling Memorial Library felt different now that her sanctuary had been violated, its familiar corridors transformed into a potential battlefield where every shadow could conceal surveillance and every sound might herald another unwelcome visit from people who knew too much about her past. The secure communication device Clark had given her sat on her desk like a loaded weapon, its encrypted display showing a countdown timer that marked the hours until her promised decision. But Natalie had already made her choice the moment she'd heard Danny's call for help. The only question now was how to execute a rescue mission while maintaining enough operational security to survive whatever trap might be waiting. Danny Rodriguez had been more than a teammate during their SEAL Team Delta days. He'd been the younger brother she'd never had, the operator who'd covered her back during missions that pushed the boundaries of what human beings could accomplish under impossible conditions. When she disappeared from military service, she'd left behind more than a career. She'd abandoned the people who depended on her, trusting that their shared training would keep them alive in her absence. The guilt of that abandonment had haunted her academic years, surfacing during quiet moments when she wasn't busy maintaining the fiction of her peaceful civilian existence. Every news report about military casualties in classified operations made her wonder if former teammates were dying while she cataloged medieval manuscripts. Every encrypted communication from old contacts that she'd ignored represented another severed connection to the person she'd once been. At 3:47 a.m., her passive surveillance systems detected movement around the library's perimeter. Not the random patterns of campus security or late-night students, but the coordinated reconnaissance of people conducting professional surveillance. They were being watched, probably by multiple teams using overlapping coverage to ensure she couldn't leave without detection. Natalie activated her most sensitive electronic countermeasures, scanning for the electromagnetic signatures that would indicate listening devices or video surveillance. The results were troubling. At least 6 different transmission frequencies were active in the immediate area, representing surveillance capabilities far beyond what any single government agency would deploy for a routine operation. Someone was taking her very seriously, which meant someone understood exactly how dangerous she could be if she decided to resist. The level of resources being devoted to monitoring one librarian suggested this situation involved more than Danny's rescue. There were larger forces at work, using his capture as leverage to force her into the open where she could be controlled or eliminated. At dawn, Clark returned as promised, but this time she came alone. No tactical team, no obvious security detail. Just a single federal agent walking across campus like any other early morning visitor. She carried a briefcase and moved with the confident stride of someone who knew she held all the advantages in whatever negotiation was about to unfold. Natalie met her at the library's main entrance, having spent the pre-dawn hours preparing for multiple contingencies. Her academic disguise was back in place, but beneath her conservative exterior were modifications that would have impressed her former SEAL instructors. Ceramic body armor disguised as a medical back brace, communication equipment hidden in what appeared to be hearing aids, and emergency supplies concealed in a briefcase that looked identical to thousands carried by professors across the country. "Dr. Frost, I trust you've had time to consider our conversation." "I've considered it, but I have questions that need answers before I commit to anything." Clark nodded, unlocking her briefcase to reveal files that made Natalie's blood run cold. Photographs of Danny Rodriguez in custody, showing injuries that suggested he'd been subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques. Medical reports indicating systematic torture designed to extract information rather than inflict maximum damage. And most disturbing of all, intercepted communications suggesting his captors were in contact with buyers interested in purchasing intelligence about classified U.S. military operations. "He's being held at a facility in the Carpathian Mountains," Clark explained, spreading tactical maps across Natalie's desk. "Former Soviet military installation, now operated by a private security company with ties to several international criminal organizations. They specialize in extracting information from high-value prisoners and selling that intelligence to the highest bidders." Natalie studied the maps with professional interest, automatically noting approach routes, defensive positions, and extraction possibilities. The facility was a fortress, built into mountainous terrain that offered natural barriers against conventional assault. Any rescue operation would require specialized skills, advanced equipment, and intimate knowledge of techniques used in classified military operations. "Why Danny?" she asked. "What information could he possess that would be worth this kind of risk?" Clark's expression darkened. SEAL Team Delta was involved in operations that officially never happened, missions that crossed international boundaries and violated treaties that most people don't know exist. Danny Rodriguez was present during activities that could embarrass multiple allied governments if they became public knowledge. The implication was clear. Danny wasn't just being tortured for military intelligence. He was being broken down to reveal the kind of political secrets that could destabilize international relationships and destroy careers at the highest levels of government. His captors weren't working for traditional enemy states. They were selling information to anyone willing to pay for leverage against the United States and its allies. "What's the mission parameters?" Natalie asked. Clark pulled out a tablet displaying satellite imagery of the target facility, updated in real time to show current defensive positions and patrol patterns. Single-person infiltration. Electronic surveillance indicates approximately 20 hostile personnel, rotating shifts, professional military backgrounds. The facility's isolation makes conventional rescue impossible without triggering international incidents. Natalie examined the intelligence package with growing unease. The mission profile was exactly the kind of operation she'd specialized in during her SEAL Team Delta years. High-risk infiltration, requiring improvisation, technical expertise, and the ability to operate independently behind enemy lines.
But something about the setup felt wrong, too convenient, too perfectly matched to her specific skill set. "Who else knows about this operation?" she asked. Clark hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Natalie saw the truth. This wasn't an officially sanctioned rescue mission. It was something else entirely, using Danny's capture as justification for activities that existed in the gray areas between legitimate government operations and illegal private actions. "The operation is compartmentalized," Clark replied. "Need-to-know basis, executive authorization, minimal paper trail." Translation: if anything went wrong, there would be no official recognition, no governmental support, and no accountability for the people who'd authorized whatever was really happening. Natalie would be operating without backup, without oversight, and without any guarantee that the people sending her were actually working in her country's best interests. "I need to see more detailed intelligence on the facility's internal layout, guard rotations, communication protocols, prisoner holding areas. If I'm going to extract Danny, I need to know exactly what I'm walking into." Clark smiled for the first time since their initial meeting. "I was hoping you'd say that." She produced a second tablet containing building schematics that were far more detailed than satellite imagery should have provided. Floor plans showing internal room layouts, ventilation systems, and security measures that could only have been obtained through inside intelligence or very sophisticated reconnaissance. The level of detail suggested someone had been planning this operation for months, possibly years. "Timeline?" Natalie asked. 48 hours. Danny's captors are demanding payment for information he's already provided. If we don't extract him before the transaction is completed, he becomes a liability they'll eliminate to protect their other operations. Natalie closed the files, her mind automatically running through mission planning sequences that had been burned into her memory through years of classified operations. Equipment requirements, infiltration routes, contingency plans for when everything inevitable went wrong. But beneath the tactical analysis was a growing certainty that this mission was more complex than Clark was revealing. "I'll need complete operational autonomy," she said. "No oversight, no real-time communication requirements, no changes to the mission parameters once I'm deployed." Clark nodded agreement. "Understood. You'll have whatever resources you need and complete authority to execute the mission as you see fit." As they finalized the arrangements, Natalie felt the familiar sensation of crossing from civilian safety into operational danger. But this time was different. This time, she was walking into unknown territory without the institutional support that had once made such risks calculable. She was about to discover whether 7 years of academic life had dulled the instincts that had once made her one of the military's most effective operators. The war for Danny Rodriguez's life was about to begin, but Natalie suspected that his rescue was only the opening move in a much larger and more dangerous game.
24 hours later, Natalie stood on the tarmac of a private airfield outside Billings, Montana, watching as a modified C-130 transport aircraft prepared for departure. The plane bore no identifying markings, its gray exterior designed to blend into backgrounds and avoid the kind of attention that official military aircraft attracted. Everything about the operation screamed black budget funding and compartmentalized authorization. Clark had provided equipment that exceeded anything Natalie had used during her official SEAL Team Delta operations. Advanced night vision systems, communication gear encrypted with algorithms she didn't recognize, and weapons that incorporated technologies she was certain hadn't been available 7 years ago when she'd disappeared from military service. Someone with serious resources was backing this mission, which made their motives increasingly questionable. The flight to Eastern Europe took 14 hours, crossing international boundaries without appearing on any civilian aviation tracking systems. Natalie spent the time reviewing intelligence reports and studying satellite imagery, but the more she learned about Danny's situation, the more convinced she became that critical information was being withheld from her. The facility holding Danny was owned by Blackwater Industries, a private military contractor with ties to intelligence agencies in at least 6 countries. Officially, they provided security services and personnel training to legitimate clients.
Unofficially, they operated detention facilities where individuals could be held and interrogated without the legal protections that governed official government operations. What troubled Natalie most was the timeline. According to Clark's briefings, Danny had been captured during an unauthorized reconnaissance mission 3 weeks earlier. But the intelligence package showed surveillance photos dating back months, suggesting someone had been tracking his activities long before his actual capture. This wasn't a rescue mission responding to an unexpected crisis. It was the culmination of a long-term operation designed to put specific people in specific positions. The drop zone was located in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, terrain that offered natural concealment but limited escape routes. Natalie would be inserted 15 kilometers from the target facility, requiring a cross-country movement through wilderness that was monitored by sensors and patrolled by security teams. The approach would test every survival skill she'd learned during her military career. As the C-130 reached the drop coordinates, Natalie performed final equipment checks with the mechanical precision of someone who'd made similar preparations hundreds of times. Parachute systems, navigation equipment, weapons, medical supplies, and communication gear all configured for a mission that officially didn't exist and might not have the governmental support she'd been promised. Raven, the aircraft's loadmaster called, using her former call sign, 2 minutes to drop. The name sent adrenaline surging through her system, awakening reflexes that had been dormant during her academic years. For 7 years, she'd been Dr. Natalie Frost, contributing to human knowledge through scholarly research and teaching. But the person preparing to jump into hostile territory was Lieutenant Commander Natalie Frost, call sign Raven, one of the most effective operators in SEAL Team Delta's classified history. The jump itself was routine, a high-altitude insertion designed to avoid radar detection and minimize the chance of observation from ground-based surveillance. Natalie's canopy opened silently in the thin mountain air, allowing her to glide toward the landing zone with the controlled descent that made the difference between successful infiltration and mission compromise. The Romanian wilderness was beautiful and deadly, its steep valleys and dense forests providing perfect concealment for both infiltrators and the security teams hunting them. Natalie moved through the terrain with cat-like silence, following routes that avoided known sensor positions while maintaining progress toward her objective. Every step was calculated to minimize her signature while maximizing her ability to respond to unexpected threats. The Blackwater facility appeared exactly as described in the intelligence briefings, a converted Soviet-era military installation built into the mountainside, with defensive positions that commanded excellent fields of fire against conventional assault. But Natalie's approach would be anything conventional. She'd learned long ago that the most impregnable fortresses were often vulnerable to patient infiltration by someone willing to exploit their blind spots. The perimeter security was professional but predictable, following patterns that suggested military training rather than creative thinking. Guard rotations occurred every 4 hours, electronic sensors covered obvious approach routes, and communication protocols followed standard private military contractor procedures. Natalie spent 6 hours observing these patterns, noting weaknesses that could be exploited by someone with her specialized training. The infiltration itself took 3 hours of careful movement through ventilation systems and maintenance tunnels that weren't covered by the facility's surveillance network. Natalie's smaller frame and advanced technical training allowed her to access areas that would have been impossible for larger operators, threading through spaces barely wider than her shoulders while carrying enough equipment to fight her way out if the mission went wrong. Danny Rodriguez was being held in the facility's medical wing, ostensibly receiving treatment for injuries sustained during his capture, but actually undergoing systematic interrogation designed to extract information without leaving permanent physical evidence. When Natalie found him, he was conscious, but clearly suffering from the effects of drugs used to lower psychological resistance during questioning. "Raven?" His voice was barely a whisper, but his eyes showed recognition mixed with something that looked like relief and terror. "Jesus, they said you were dead. They said all of Team Delta was eliminated." Natalie began working on his restraints, using tools that made quick work of the sophisticated locks holding him. "Not dead, Danny. Just invisible. Can you move?" "I think so." He tested his limbs cautiously, wincing at the pain from injuries that were clearly more extensive than what showed on the surface. "Raven, this whole thing is wrong.
They've been asking questions about operations that never happened, missions that weren't part of any briefing I ever received. That confirmation sent ice through Natalie's veins. If Danny's interrogators were fishing for information about classified operations that even Team Delta members didn't know about, it meant someone with access to extremely sensitive intelligence was directing their questions. The kind of access that suggested involvement from within the U.S. intelligence community itself. "We'll sort it out later," she said, helping him to his feet. "Right now, we need to get out of here." The extraction route she'd planned relied on stealth and misdirection, avoiding the facility's main security checkpoints while using maintenance areas to reach the perimeter. But as they moved through the corridors, Natalie's instincts began screaming warnings that something fundamental had changed about their situation. The facility was too quiet. Security patrols that should have been active were nowhere to be seen. Electronic surveillance systems that had been fully operational during her infiltration were now showing signs of systematic shutdown. Either they'd walked into a trap, or someone was clearing their escape route for reasons that had nothing to do with successful mission completion. "Danny," she whispered as they approached the final checkpoint before the perimeter, "who knew about your mission to Romania?" His face went pale in the emergency lighting. "Nobody." It was compartmentalized, need to know only. Clark said it was vital to national security, something about tracking weapons shipments to terrorist organizations. Clark. The same agent who'd recruited Natalie for this rescue mission, the woman who'd possessed intelligence that was too detailed and too current for legitimate sources. The operative who'd authorized a mission that existed outside normal government oversight. "What exactly were you investigating?" Natalie asked. Danny's expression showed the kind of recognition that comes with pieces of a puzzle suddenly fitting together in ways that revealed uncomfortable truths. Arms dealing between U.S. military contractors and foreign buyers. Weapons that were supposed to be destroyed after conflicts ended, but were instead being sold to private clients. The implications hit Natalie like a physical blow. Danny hadn't been captured during an unauthorized mission. He'd been betrayed by someone who wanted to prevent him from exposing corruption that reached into the highest levels of the military-industrial complex. His rescue wasn't about saving a teammate. It was about eliminating a witness whose testimony could bring down careers and end lucrative illegal operations. As they cleared the facility's perimeter and began moving toward the extraction point, Natalie realized that the real mission was just beginning. They weren't escaping from enemy territory. They were fleeing from people who were supposed to be on their side, carrying information that could expose betrayal at levels she was only beginning to comprehend. The extraction helicopter that was supposed to be waiting for them would either provide salvation or represent the final trap in an operation designed to eliminate everyone who knew too much about activities that were never supposed to come to light. Either way, the quiet librarian from Montana was about to discover whether 7 years of academic life had prepared her for the kind of war where the enemies wore the same flag she had once sworn to defend. The extraction point was a clearing 12 kilometers from the Blackwater facility, chosen for its concealment from ground observation and its accessibility for helicopter operations. Natalie and Danny reached it 40 minutes ahead of schedule, using the extra time to establish overwatch positions that would allow them to assess the situation before committing to what might be their final mistake. Danny's condition was deteriorating. The drugs his interrogators had used were wearing off, replaced by withdrawal symptoms that included tremors, disorientation, and periodic loss of consciousness. Whatever chemicals they'd pumped into his system had been designed to break down psychological resistance, but the after effects were proving nearly as dangerous as his original injuries. "Talk to me about the arms dealing," Natalie whispered as they waited in concealment. "What exactly did you discover?" Danny's voice was weak but focused, the training that had made him an effective SEAL helping him fight through the chemical fog. Weapons shipments that were supposed to be destroyed after Iraq and Afghanistan operations. Instead, they were being diverted to private buyers through contractors like Blackwater. Military-grade equipment ending up in the hands of drug cartels, terrorist organizations, anyone willing to pay the right price. The scope of what he was describing made Natalie's blood run cold. Not just individual corruption, but systematic theft of military resources on a scale that could destabilize entire regions. The kind of operation that would require protection from within the government itself, people with the authority to classify evidence and eliminate witnesses. "Who else knew about your investigation?" she asked. "That's the problem. The intelligence came through official channels. Clark provided the leads, authorized the surveillance, even supplied the equipment I used for reconnaissance. If she's involved in what I was investigating, then..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. If Clark was part of the conspiracy Danny had been investigating, then his capture hadn't been the result of operational failure. It had been deliberate betrayal, designed to eliminate a threat while creating the perfect opportunity to draw Natalie out of hiding and into a controlled environment where she could be eliminated as well. The sound of rotor blades approaching from the south interrupted their conversation. A single helicopter, flying low to avoid radar detection, following exactly the flight path Clark had described during their mission briefing. But Natalie's instincts were screaming warnings that had nothing to do with normal operational paranoia. Through her night vision scope, she could see the aircraft clearly. A modified Black Hawk helicopter with markings that identified it as belonging to a private military contractor rather than official U.S. military forces. The crew visible through the cockpit windows weren't wearing standard military uniforms. They were dressed in tactical gear that favored mercenaries and private security operators. "That's not our ride," she whispered to Danny. The helicopter settled into the clearing with professional precision, its crew maintaining positions that provided excellent fields of fire against anyone approaching from the surrounding forest. But instead of the extraction team they'd been promised, the people who emerged were armed for combat operations rather than personnel recovery. Agent Clark stepped out of the passenger compartment, flanked by operators whose equipment and bearing marked them as experienced professionals. She carried a tablet that she consulted before signaling her team to establish a perimeter around the landing zone. Everything about her posture suggested someone executing a carefully planned operation rather than responding to an unexpected rescue situation. "Dr. Frost," Clark's voice carried clearly across the clearing, amplified by a portable speaker system. "I know you're out there. Come in and we can discuss the situation like professionals." Natalie keyed her communication system to the frequency Clark's team was using, an encrypted channel that confirmed their sophisticated equipment and coordination. "Agent Clark, this is Raven. What happened to our extraction team?" Clark's laugh was cold and professional. "There never was an extraction team, Natalie. This entire operation was designed to bring you and Rodriguez together in a controlled environment where certain problems could be resolved permanently." The admission confirmed what Natalie had already suspected. But hearing it spoken aloud still hit like a physical blow. Every aspect of the mission had been orchestrated to manipulate her into a position where she could be eliminated along with the evidence Danny represented. The rescue operation had been bait, in a trap that was now closing around them. "Why?" Natalie asked, though she was already working on tactical solutions rather than waiting for explanations.
"Because you and Rodriguez know too much about operations that were never supposed to be documented. Danny's investigation uncovered financial connections between government officials and private contractors that could bring down administrations. Your knowledge of classified activities makes you a similar liability." Clark gestured to her team, who began moving toward the forest line with the coordinated precision of people executing a well-rehearsed plan. "But we're offering you a choice. Come in voluntarily, and your deaths will be quick and clean. Make us hunt you down, and the process becomes much more unpleasant." Natalie was already moving, helping Danny to his feet and guiding him toward the escape route she'd identified during their approach to the clearing. The terrain offered limited concealment, but she'd been trained to make the most of whatever advantages were available. The key was creating enough confusion and misdirection to break contact before Clark's team could establish effective pursuit. "Can you run?" she whispered to Danny. "Do I have a choice?" They moved through the forest with desperate speed, using techniques learned during SEAL team training to minimize their trail while maximizing distance from their pursuers. But Danny's condition made stealth impossible, and the sounds of their movement would allow professional trackers to follow them even in complete darkness.
Behind them, Clark's team was spreading out in a pursuit formation that demonstrated extensive training in manhunting operations. They were using thermal imaging equipment and motion sensors to track their quarry, technologies that made traditional evasion techniques far less effective. Natalie's mind was racing through options, calculating distances and timing while assessing their limited resources. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating in unfamiliar territory against opponents who'd had time to prepare for exactly this situation. Under normal circumstances, the tactical situation would be hopeless. But Natalie had never operated under normal circumstances. During her SEAL Team Delta career, she'd specialized in missions that required improvisation under impossible conditions. The skills that had made her effective then were still available, dormant but not forgotten after 7 years of academic life. "There's something I need to tell you," Danny said as they paused to catch their breath behind a fallen tree. "The arms-dealing investigation wasn't my idea. I was recruited for it by someone who claimed to be working for congressional oversight, trying to expose corruption in military procurement." Natalie felt another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "Who recruited you?" "A woman named Sarah Phillips said she was with the Inspector General's office investigating reports of irregularities in weapons disposal procedures." Danny's face showed the recognition of someone understanding how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. The name meant nothing to Natalie, but the pattern was becoming clear. Danny's investigation hadn't been unauthorized. It had been officially sanctioned by people who wanted to identify everyone involved in exposing the arms-dealing conspiracy, creating a list of witnesses who needed to be eliminated to protect the operation. "They played us both," she realized. "Your investigation was designed to flush out other people who might have information about the arms dealing. My rescue mission was designed to bring us together so they could eliminate multiple problems simultaneously." The sound of pursuit was getting closer, voices coordinating through encrypted radios as Clark's team tightened their search pattern. Natalie estimated they had perhaps 10 minutes before contact became unavoidable. 10 minutes to find a solution that would allow them to survive an encounter with professional killers operating with governmental authorization. But survival was only the first step. If they managed to escape this immediate trap, they would still be fugitives hunted by people with unlimited resources and official protection. The real challenge wouldn't be getting out of the Romanian wilderness. It would be finding a way to expose the corruption that had made them targets while staying alive long enough to present evidence that could bring down the people responsible. In the distance, the Black Hawk helicopter was repositioning to cut off their escape routes, its sophisticated sensors sweeping the forest for heat signatures and electronic emissions. Clark's voice echoed through the trees, promising quick deaths for cooperation and slow ones for continued resistance. The quiet librarian from Montana was about to discover whether the warrior she had once been could survive a war against enemies who wore her own country's flag. The abandoned Soviet listening post was barely visible through the forest canopy, its concrete structures weathered by decades of mountain storms and neglect. Natalie had spotted it during their flight reconnaissance, filing the location away as a potential contingency asset. Now, with Clark's team closing in and Danny's condition worsening, it represented their only chance for defensible shelter while she formulated a plan that went beyond simple survival. The facility's underground levels had been carved into the mountainside during the Cold War, designed to house sensitive communications equipment and the personnel who operated it. Most of the original electronics had been stripped out years ago, but the hardened construction and multiple access points made it perfect for someone who needed to control engagements with pursuing forces. Danny collapsed against a concrete wall as they reached the facility's main entrance. His face was pale and his breathing shallow, the after effects of his interrogation drugs, combining with physical exhaustion to push his system toward complete breakdown. But his eyes remained alert, focused with the determination of someone who understood that failure meant more than personal death. "Natalie," he whispered, gripping her arm with surprising strength. "There's something else. The arms-dealing operation isn't just about weapons sales. They're using the profits to fund black operations that Congress never authorized, activities that violate international treaties and domestic surveillance laws." The implications sent ice through her veins. Not just corruption, but systematic subversion of constitutional oversight designed to create a shadow government funded through illegal arms sales.
The kind of conspiracy that would justify eliminating anyone who threatened to expose it, regardless of their service record or patriotic credentials. "Who else knows about this?" she asked. "That's the problem," Danny replied. "I think we're the only ones left alive who understand the full scope of what they're doing. Everyone else who got close to the truth has had accidents, disappeared, or been transferred to assignments where they couldn't investigate further." Through the concrete walls, Natalie could hear Clark's team establishing positions around the listening post. Professional voices coordinating through encrypted radios, discussing fields of fire and assault routes with the calm competence of people who'd conducted similar operations many times before. They weren't rushing because they didn't need to. They had superior numbers, better equipment, and official backing that would allow them to clean up whatever evidence remained after the elimination was completed. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed that 7 years of academic life had dulled the instincts that had made Natalie one of SEAL Team Delta's most effective operators. They'd forgotten that some skills, once learned, became part of a person's fundamental nature, waiting dormant until circumstances demanded their activation. Natalie began moving through the abandoned facility with systematic precision, cataloging resources and identifying advantages that could be exploited against opponents who believed they held all the cards. The Soviet engineers who'd built this place had been paranoid about Western intelligence operations, creating multiple escape routes, hidden observation points, and communication systems that could operate independent of external infrastructure. Most importantly, they'd installed emergency equipment that included encrypted radio systems designed to reach Moscow, even if all other communications were compromised. The equipment was obsolete by modern standards, but Natalie's technical training included expertise in Soviet-era electronics. With proper modifications, those systems could be used to contact people who needed to know about the conspiracy that had made her and Danny targets. "I need you to do something for me," she told Danny as she began working on the radio equipment. "Record everything you know about the arms dealing operation. Names, dates, financial transactions, everything. If something happens to us, that information needs to reach people who can use it." Danny understood immediately. He activated the recording function on his communication equipment, speaking in the calm, professional tone of someone providing testimony that might be his final act of service to his country. Names of officials who authorized illegal weapons transfers, bank accounts used to launder profits from arms sales, locations of storage facilities where military equipment was prepared for illegal distribution. While he recorded his evidence, Natalie worked on establishing contact with the outside world. The Soviet radio systems were more robust than she'd hoped, and her modifications were allowing her to reach frequencies monitored by news organizations, congressional oversight committees, and military personnel who weren't part of the conspiracy that had targeted them.
The first transmission was brief but devastating. "This is Lieutenant Commander Natalie Frost, call sign Raven, formerly of SEAL Team Delta. I am currently under attack by U.S. government personnel who are attempting to eliminate witnesses to illegal arms dealing operations conducted by private military contractors with official authorization." She followed that with Danny's recorded testimony, broadcasting it on frequencies that would ensure multiple recipients received copies of evidence that could bring down careers and end illegal operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Clark's response was immediate and predictable. Her voice echoed through speakers placed around the listening post, the tone shifting from professional courtesy to barely controlled fury. "Dr. Frost, you've just committed treason by broadcasting classified information on unsecured channels. Surrender now, and we might be able to arrange a plea agreement." Natalie's laughter carried through her response transmission. "Agent Clark, treason is betraying your country for personal gain. What you're doing is treason. What I'm doing is fulfilling my oath to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic." The assault began 3 minutes later, launched with the coordinated precision of people who'd clearly studied the facility's layout and prepared for exactly this scenario. But they were attacking a defensive position prepared by someone who understood their tactics, anticipated their approach routes, and had spent the previous hour creating surprises that would test their professional competence. The Soviet engineers had built multiple layers of defense into the listening post, including remotely controlled barriers that could channel attacking forces into predetermined killing zones.
Natalie had reactivated these systems, creating a maze that forced Clark's team to advance through corridors where single defenders could hold off much larger forces. More importantly, she had used her technical expertise to turn the facility's original surveillance systems against the attackers. Cameras and motion sensors that had once watched for Western spies now tracked Clark's team, providing real-time intelligence about their positions and intentions. The hunted had become the hunter, using superior knowledge of terrain and defensive preparation to neutralize advantages that her opponents had taken for granted. The first casualty occurred when Clark's point man triggered a booby trap that Natalie had improvised using Soviet-era demolitions found in the facility's armory. The explosion was loud enough to be heard kilometers away, sending a clear message that the quiet librarian from Montana retained capabilities that her academic career had hidden but not eliminated. Clark's voice returned to the speakers, but the professional confidence was gone, replaced by the frustrated anger of someone whose careful plans were unraveling. "You're only postponing the inevitable, Raven. We have unlimited resources and official backing. You have one broken-down facility and a wounded teammate." Natalie's response was broadcast not just to Clark's team, but to multiple agencies and news organizations that were now monitoring their communications. "Agent Clark, let me tell you what I have. I have evidence of systematic corruption involving illegal arms sales, unauthorized black operations, and the murder of American service members to cover up these activities. I have documentation that will bring down everyone involved in these operations, from the contractors who executed them to the officials who authorized them." She paused, allowing the implications to sink in before continuing. "But most importantly, I have something you seem to have forgotten. I have the training, experience, and determination to ensure that justice is served, regardless of the personal cost." Outside, the sounds of the assault were intensifying, but they were also becoming more cautious. Clark's team had realized they were no longer hunting a helpless librarian hiding in the wilderness. They were confronting a highly trained operator defending prepared positions with intimate knowledge of their tactics and capabilities. The war for truth had begun, and the quiet academic who'd spent 7 years hiding from her past was about to remind everyone why Lieutenant Commander Natalie Frost had once been considered one of the most dangerous people in the United States military.
The standoff at the Soviet listening post lasted 18 hours, but the real battle was being fought in conference rooms and secure communications centers thousands of miles away. Natalie's broadcasts had triggered emergency sessions in Washington, with congressional oversight committees demanding explanations for unauthorized operations, and news organizations preparing exposés that would dominate headlines for weeks. Agent Clark's situation was deteriorating rapidly. Her encrypted communications with supervisors revealed growing desperation as the political implications of the operation became clear. The evidence Danny had recorded was being analyzed by forensic accountants and military investigators, creating a paper trail that connected illegal arms sales to black operations spanning multiple administrations. Inside the listening post, Natalie monitored these developments through communication intercepts while maintaining defensive positions that had already claimed 3 casualties from Clark's assault team. The Soviet facility's design was proving more effective than she'd hoped, channeling attackers through corridors where superior firepower couldn't overcome tactical disadvantage. Danny's condition had stabilized somewhat, the worst effects of his interrogation drugs wearing off to reveal injuries that were painful but not life-threatening. More importantly, his memory was clearing, allowing him to provide additional details about the conspiracy that had made them targets. "The operation has a name," he told Natalie during a brief lull in the assault. "Operation Silent Archive. They're using profits from arms sales to fund intelligence gathering on domestic targets, including congressional representatives and federal judges who might investigate their activities." The scope of what he was describing went beyond corruption into the realm of systematic subversion of democratic institutions, using illegal weapons sales to finance domestic surveillance operations designed to protect the conspiracy from legal oversight. The kind of shadow government that conspiracy theorists imagined, but that operational security usually prevented from actual implementation. "Who authorized it?" Natalie asked.
That's what I was trying to determine when they captured me. The authorization documents I found were signed by people who officially don't have the authority to approve such operations. Either the chain of command has been compromised at the highest levels, or there's a parallel command structure operating outside constitutional oversight. Through the facility's surveillance systems, Natalie watched Clark's team regrouping for another assault attempt. But their heart wasn't in it anymore. The political situation had changed dramatically since the standoff began, with multiple government agencies now demanding answers about unauthorized operations and illegal weapons transfers. Clark's encrypted phone rang with increasing frequency, supervisors demanding status reports and expressing growing concern about media attention. The operation that had been designed to eliminate witnesses quietly was now the subject of congressional hearings and criminal investigations that would continue regardless of its ultimate outcome. The breakthrough came when Natalie intercepted a communication between Clark and her actual supervisor, a conversation that revealed the true scope of Operation Silent Archive and the identity of the people responsible for its implementation. The voice on the encrypted channel belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Paul Hendricks, her former SEAL Team Delta commanding officer who'd been presumed killed in action 3 years earlier. Paul Hendricks, former SEAL Team Delta commanding officer, officially killed in action but apparently running illegal operations for private contractors. I should have known. The response came through the facility speakers, but it wasn't Clark's voice anymore. It was Hendricks himself, speaking with the calm authority that had once made him an effective military leader, but now marked him as the architect of systematic betrayal. "Raven," he said, using her call sign with the familiarity of shared history, "you were always too smart for your own good, but you're fighting a war you can't win." The people backing Operation Silent Archive include senators, cabinet members, and intelligence officials who can authorize anything necessary to protect national security. Natalie's laughter carried through her response. "Paul, what you're describing isn't national security. It's organized crime with government credentials. The difference matters to people who still remember their oath of service." The conversation was being recorded and broadcast to multiple recipients, creating a permanent record of admissions that would be impossible to deny or classify after the fact. Every word Hendricks spoke provided additional evidence of conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government.
The arms sales were necessary, he continued, apparently believing he could justify activities that violated multiple federal laws. Congress wouldn't fund operations that were vital to national security, so we found alternative funding sources. The surveillance was necessary to protect those operations from political interference. Danny had begun recording again, capturing admissions that would provide prosecutors with evidence of systematic criminal activity spanning years of illegal operations. The conspiracy was unraveling in real time, with its architects providing testimony that would ensure convictions even if physical evidence was destroyed. But Hendricks wasn't finished. His voice carried the desperation of someone watching carefully constructed plans collapse despite overwhelming advantages. "You're forcing us to implement contingency protocols that will be much more damaging than the quiet elimination we'd planned. If you continue broadcasting, we'll have no choice but to authorize actions that will silence you permanently while discrediting anything you've revealed." The threat was clear. Escalation to methods that would eliminate witnesses while creating cover stories that would discredit their testimony. False flag operations designed to make their deaths appear related to foreign intelligence activities rather than domestic conspiracy. The kind of ultimate solution that would protect Operation Silent Archive while ensuring its exposure died with the people who discovered it. Natalie checked her equipment, noting that her broadcasts were now being monitored by agencies that included FBI counterintelligence, military criminal investigators, and congressional oversight committees. The evidence was secure, distributed to people who couldn't be intimidated or eliminated without triggering investigations that would expose the entire conspiracy. "Paul," she said, her voice carrying across multiple frequencies to audiences that included news organizations and international monitoring stations. "You've just admitted to planning the murder of American citizens to cover up illegal operations.
That confession is being recorded by people who can't be silenced or intimidated. The assault that followed was different from the previous attempts, launched with the desperate fury of people who understood they were fighting for their freedom rather than completing a routine elimination. But desperation made them sloppy, causing tactical errors that Natalie exploited with the cold precision of someone trained to kill efficiently and without hesitation. Clark herself led the final assault, breaching the facility's main defensive position with explosive charges that brought down sections of concrete wall. But she was advancing into a killing zone prepared by someone who understood her tactics and had spent hours positioning surprises that would neutralize her advantages. The confrontation was brief and decisive. Clark's tactical skills were impressive, honed through years of operations that had required competence under pressure. But she was fighting someone whose training had included scenarios exactly like this, someone who'd learned to kill in close quarters against opponents who were equally skilled and better equipped. When the shooting stopped, Clark was dead, along with most of her team. The survivors were captured, wounded, and facing criminal charges that would result in life sentences for activities that had violated their oaths of service and their obligations to the Constitution they'd sworn to defend. But the real victory wasn't tactical. It was the complete exposure of Operation's silent archive, broadcast to audiences that included congressional investigators, international media, and military personnel who would ensure accountability for systematic betrayal at the highest levels of government. As emergency medical personnel finally reached the Soviet listening post, Natalie and Danny were no longer fugitives hunted by their own government. They were witnesses whose testimony would bring down a conspiracy that had operated in the shadows for years, protected by classification and official authorization. The quiet librarian from Montana had won a war that most people would never know had been fought, but the victory would reshape oversight of intelligence operations and end careers built on betraying the principles they'd sworn to protect. Some battles were worth fighting regardless of the personal cost, and some truths were too important to remain buried in classified files and bureaucratic silence.
The Senate Intelligence Committee hearing room was packed with journalists, congressional staff, and military personnel whose careers would be defined by the testimony they were about to hear. Natalie sat at the witness table wearing a conservative business suit that concealed the healing wounds from her confrontation with Clark's team, her academic credentials providing perfect cover for someone whose real expertise lay in areas most civilians couldn't comprehend. 6 weeks had passed since the standoff in Romania, and the political earthquake triggered by Operation's silent archive was still reshaping the landscape of American intelligence operations. 3 cabinet members had resigned, 2 military contractors had declared bankruptcy to avoid criminal liability, and congressional oversight committees were conducting investigations that would continue for years. Senator Margaret Walsh, the committee chairwoman, opened the proceedings with gravity appropriate to testimony that would be classified at levels requiring presidential authorization to declassify. Dr. Frost, you understand that your testimony today will be given under oath and may be used in criminal proceedings against individuals who have not yet been charged with crimes related to the activities you observed. Natalie nodded, her voice steady as she responded. I understand completely, Senator Walsh. Everything I'm about to tell you represents direct observation of activities that violated federal law, military regulations, and the constitutional principles that govern intelligence operations. The next 4 hours revealed the systematic nature of corruption that had made her and Danny targets. Financial records showing payments from arms sales to private accounts controlled by government officials, communication intercepts proving coordination between military contractors and foreign buyers, documentation of surveillance operations targeting congressional representatives who'd asked uncomfortable questions about defense spending. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Hendricks sat in the gallery, flanked by federal marshals and wearing civilian clothes that couldn't disguise his military bearing.
His arrest 3 weeks earlier had been conducted with maximum publicity, ensuring that everyone involved in Operation's Silent Archive understood their activities were no longer protected by classification or official authorization. Danny's testimony followed Natalie's, providing details that connected individual transactions to broader patterns of systematic theft. His voice was stronger now, the effects of his interrogation drugs completely eliminated, but the psychological scars remained visible to anyone who understood the long-term impact of torture designed to break down mental resistance. The weapons shipments I tracked included equipment that was supposed to be destroyed after operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, he told the committee. Instead, they were being diverted to private buyers through contractors like Blackwater Industries, with profits used to fund domestic surveillance operations that Congress never authorized. Representative James Crawford, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, leaned forward with the intensity of someone whose oversight responsibilities had been systematically undermined. Agent Rodriguez, are you testifying that American military equipment was sold to foreign entities to finance spying on American citizens? That's exactly what I'm testifying to, Danny replied. The surveillance targets included federal judges, congressional representatives, and military officers who were asking questions about procurement irregularities and cost overruns in defense contracts. The implications sent shockwaves through the hearing room. Not just corruption, but systematic subversion of democratic oversight designed to protect illegal activities through intimidation and blackmail. The kind of shadow government that constitutional safeguards were specifically designed to prevent. Senator Margaret Walsh consulted classified documents that had been declassified specifically for these hearings, evidence that would normally remain buried in secure filing systems for decades. Dr. Frost, based on your analysis of communications intercepted during the Romania operation, who authorized the highest levels of Operation's Silent Archive? Natalie referred to her own classified briefing materials, documents that represented months of investigation by agencies that included FBI counterintelligence, military criminal investigators, and Treasury Department financial crimes specialists. The authorization trail leads to a coordinating committee that included Deputy Defense Secretary Richard Mason, CIA Operations Director Patricia Stone, and National Security Council staff member Michael Torres. The names represented careers built over decades of public service, individuals whose reputations had been considered beyond reproach until evidence emerged of their involvement in activities that violated their oaths of office. Their arrests had been conducted quietly, but their trials would be public spectacles that would redefine standards for accountability in intelligence operations.
But the most damaging testimony concerned systematic elimination of witnesses who'd threatened to expose Operation Silent Archive. Natalie presented evidence showing that 7 former SEAL Team Delta members had been killed in operations designed to appear accidental. Their deaths spread over 3 years to avoid triggering investigations that might reveal coordinated targeting. These weren't combat casualties, she told the committee. They were assassinations designed to eliminate people whose knowledge of classified operations made them liability risks. The planning documents we recovered show detailed psychological profiles and operational plans for eliminating specific individuals who might expose illegal activities. Representative Crawford's expression showed the controlled fury of someone whose constitutional responsibilities had been systematically undermined by people he'd trusted. Dr. Frost, are you testifying that American military personnel were murdered by their own government to cover up criminal activities? I'm testifying that American military personnel were murdered by criminal conspirators who used government resources and official authorization to protect illegal operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen weapons and unauthorized surveillance activities. The distinction was crucial. This wasn't government malfunction or institutional failure. It was criminal conspiracy that had co-opted government resources while operating outside constitutional oversight. The difference would determine whether reforms focused on improved accountability or criminal prosecutions that would send conspirators to federal prison for the rest of their lives. The hearing concluded with testimony from financial experts who'd traced money flows through offshore accounts, revealing the scope of profits generated through illegal arms sales. Conservative estimates suggested Operation Silent Archive had generated over $400 million in illegal revenue, funds that had been used to finance domestic surveillance, foreign operations, and personal enrichment for everyone involved in the conspiracy. Outside the hearing room, Natalie found herself surrounded by journalists asking questions about her transformation from quiet librarian to star witness in congressional investigations that would reshape American intelligence operations. Her answers were carefully rehearsed, focusing on institutional reform rather than personal heroics. The real heroes are the congressional representatives and agency investigators who ensured that evidence was properly analyzed and criminal prosecutions were initiated, she told reporters. My role was simply providing testimony about activities I'd observed. But privately, she understood that her testimony had accomplished something more significant. Than criminal convictions or policy reforms, it had demonstrated that individuals with specialized training and moral courage could hold powerful institutions accountable, even when those institutions possessed overwhelming resources and official authorization. Danny approached as the media attention subsided, walking with slight favoring of his left leg that would probably be permanent reminder of his interrogation. "So what's next?" he asked. "Back to fixing medieval manuscripts and teaching graduate students about research methodology?" Natalie smiled, considering the question seriously. Her academic career at Westfield University remained available, protected by tenure and institutional support that had weathered the publicity surrounding her congressional testimony. She could return to the quiet life she'd built, contributing to human knowledge while maintaining the invisibility that had kept her safe for 7 years. But Operation Silent Archive had revealed systematic problems that extended beyond individual criminal conspiracy. There were other programs operating in similar gray areas, other contractors profiting from illegal activities, other officials who believed classification could protect any activity they'd chose to authorize. "I think," she said carefully, "that there might be other libraries that need better security systems, other collections that require specialized maintenance, other research projects that would benefit from someone with unusual qualifications." Danny understood immediately. The quiet librarian from Montana was about to become something more dangerous, a guardian watching over people who couldn't protect themselves, using skills that most academics never learned and knowledge that most citizens never suspected existed. The war against Operation Silent Archive was over, but the battle for accountability in intelligence operations had just begun.
18 months after the congressional hearings, the final verdicts were delivered in the largest national security corruption trial in American history. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. was surrounded by media trucks and protesters representing every point on the political spectrum, united only in their demand for accountability from officials who'd betrayed their oaths of service. Deputy Defense Secretary Richard Mason received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. His conviction on charges that included treason, murder conspiracy, and racketeering representing the complete destruction of a career built over 3 decades of public service. The judge's comments during sentencing reflected the gravity of crimes that had undermined constitutional principles and resulted in the deaths of American military personnel. CIA Operations Director Patricia Stone and NSC staff member Michael Torres received similar sentences, their trials revealing the extent to which Operation Silent Archive had corrupted oversight mechanisms designed to prevent exactly the kind of activities they'd authorized. The evidence presented during their prosecutions would be studied in law schools and military academies for generations, serving as cautionary examples of how institutional power could be subverted for criminal purposes. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Hendricks never lived to see trial. His death in federal custody was officially ruled suicide, but Natalie suspected he'd been eliminated by surviving members of the conspiracy who couldn't risk his testimony during criminal proceedings. Some secrets were too dangerous to allow their keepers to remain alive, even in maximum security facilities designed to prevent exactly that kind of elimination. The private military contractors involved in Operation Silent Archive faced corporate death penalties that dissolved their companies and distributed their assets to victims' families and veterans' organizations. Blackwater Industries, the primary arms dealing operation, was liquidated entirely, its executives receiving prison sentences that would ensure they spent the remainder of their lives in federal custody. But the most significant outcome wasn't individual prosecutions or corporate dissolution. It was systematic reform of oversight mechanisms that had allowed Operation Silent Archive to operate without detection for years. Congressional intelligence committees received expanded authority to investigate classified operations, with new requirements for documentation and reporting that would make similar conspiracies far more difficult to implement and maintain. Natalie watched these developments from her restored position at Westfield University, where she'd returned to teaching graduate students and maintaining the special collections that had once concealed her true identity. The Sterling Memorial Library looked exactly as it had before federal agents had violated its academic sanctuary, but everything had changed in ways that weren't visible to casual observers. The vault beneath the library now served a different purpose. Instead of hiding evidence of her own past, it housed documentation that could protect other veterans who found themselves targeted by corrupt officials or criminal conspirators. The secure communication systems that had once kept her invisible now provided lifelines for people who needed to disappear or required assistance that couldn't be obtained through official channels. Danny Rodriguez had officially retired from military service, but his work continued through congressional testimony and consulting that helped investigators understand the complex financial networks used to fund illegal operations. His expertise in tracking weapons shipments and analyzing procurement irregularities had become invaluable to agencies responsible for preventing similar conspiracies from developing. "We've made a difference," he told Natalie during one of his visits to Montana. "But there are other operations out there, other contractors profiting from activities that violate everything we fought to protect." Natalie understood his concern. Operation Silent Archive had been dismantled and its participants prosecuted, but the conditions that had allowed it to develop remained largely unchanged. Military procurement systems that were too complex for effective oversight, classification authorities that could be used to hide criminal activities, and private contractors who operated in gray areas between legitimate government service and criminal conspiracy. The solution required more than criminal prosecutions or regulatory reforms. It required dedicated individuals who understood both the system's vulnerabilities and the techniques used to exploit them. People with the skills and motivation to identify problems before they became criminal conspiracies that cost lives and undermined democratic institutions. That's when the first approach came, delivered through channels so secure that their existence wasn't acknowledged by any official agency. A young Army intelligence officer named Captain Sarah Williams, whose investigation into procurement irregularities had triggered death threats from unknown sources. Her commanding officers had advised her to drop the investigation and accept reassignment to duties that wouldn't involve asking uncomfortable questions about defense contracts.
The meeting took place in Natalie's vault, where Captain Williams presented evidence suggesting that Operation Silent Archive had been only one component of a larger network of criminal activities involving multiple contractors and government officials. Her documentation showed weapons sales, surveillance operations, and financial transactions that indicated systematic corruption across multiple military branches and civilian agencies. "I need someone who understands how these systems work," Williams told Natalie, "someone with the expertise to analyze this evidence and the credibility to present it to people who can authorize investigations." Natalie studied the young officer, recognizing the same combination of idealism and determination that had once motivated her own service in SEAL Team Delta.
Williams represented exactly the kind of person that corrupt officials would eliminate to protect their operations, someone whose integrity made her a threat to criminal activities that depended on institutional silence and complicity. Captain Williams, Natalie said carefully, the people you're investigating have demonstrated their willingness to kill American military personnel to protect their operations. If you continue this investigation, you'll be putting yourself in extreme danger from individuals who have official authority and unlimited resources. Williams nodded, her expression showing that she understood the risks but had already decided they were acceptable. Dr. Frost, with respect, I've read the congressional testimony about Operation Silent Archive. I know what happened to the people who tried to expose that conspiracy. But I also know what happens when good people do nothing while criminal conspiracies operate under official protection. The decision was easy. Natalie had spent 7 years hiding from responsibilities that extended beyond her personal safety or academic career. The quiet librarian from Montana was about to become something that corrupt officials and criminal contractors would learn to fear. A guardian who protected people whose integrity made them targets for elimination by criminal conspiracies operating under official protection. All right, she said, activating the communication systems that would connect them to networks spanning multiple countries and security agencies. Let's see what you've discovered. The investigation that followed revealed procurement corruption that made Operation Silent Archive appear modest by comparison. Defense contracts worth billions of dollars, awarded to companies that existed only on paper. Weapons shipments to foreign buyers who included terrorist organizations and drug cartels. Surveillance operations targeting federal judges, congressional representatives, and military officers whose oversight responsibilities threatened criminal profits. Most disturbing was evidence suggesting that corrupt officials had learned from Operation Silent Archive's exposure, implementing new security measures designed to prevent similar investigations from succeeding. Compartmentalized communications, redundant financial networks, and elimination protocols that would activate automatically if their activities were threatened by whistleblowers or oversight investigators. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed that the exposure of Operation Silent Archive had been an isolated incident, a single rogue operation that had been eliminated through proper law enforcement procedures. They hadn't anticipated that survivors of that conspiracy would continue monitoring for similar activities, using skills and resources that existed outside official channels. The Sterling Memorial Library became the center of an informal network that included military personnel, congressional staff, journalists, and agency investigators who shared information about suspicious activities and coordinated responses that traditional oversight mechanisms couldn't provide. It was the kind of citizen watchdog organization that democratic institutions required, but that official agencies couldn't create without compromising their objectivity and independence. Captain Williams became the network's first success story, her evidence leading to investigations that resulted in criminal prosecutions and corporate dissolution on a scale that exceeded even the Operation Silent Archive trials. But more importantly, her courage inspired other military personnel and civilian officials to come forward with information about corruption they'd observed but been afraid to report through normal channels. The quiet librarian from Montana had found her true calling, not as an academic researching historical documents, but as a guardian protecting people whose integrity made them targets for elimination by criminal conspiracies operating under official protection. Some battles were worth fighting regardless of personal risk, and some responsibilities extended beyond individual safety to the preservation of institutions that made democratic government possible. Dr. Natalie Frost, former SEAL Team Delta operator, had discovered that the most important mission of her career was just beginning.
5 years after the Operation Silent Archive trials, Westfield University hosted an academic conference on government transparency that attracted researchers, journalists, and policy experts from around the world. The Sterling Memorial Library's main reading room buzzed with conversations about oversight mechanisms, classification reform, and the ongoing challenge of balancing national security requirements with democratic accountability. Dr. Natalie Frost moved through the conference participants with the quiet confidence of someone whose scholarly reputation had been built on expertise that most academics could only theorize about. Her presentation on historical patterns of intelligence oversight had received enthusiastic responses from colleagues who saw her as a rising star in the field of government studies, unaware that her insights came from direct experience rather than archival research. The vault beneath the library had evolved into something that would have impressed the Pentagon's most sophisticated operations centers. Secure communication systems connected her to networks spanning 6 continents, processing information from military personnel, congressional staff, and investigative journalists who'd learned to trust her analysis of corruption patterns and criminal conspiracies. Her informal network had grown to include over 200 individuals whose positions provided access to information about suspicious activities in defense procurement, intelligence operations, and private military contracting. They weren't conspirators plotting against legitimate government activities. They were patriotic Americans whose integrity made them natural watchdogs against the kind of systematic corruption that had made Operation Silent Archive possible. The cases they'd handled ranged from relatively minor procurement fraud to criminal conspiracies that rivaled the scale of Hendrick's operation, a Navy contracting scandal involving submarine maintenance contracts and foreign intelligence services, an Army procurement operation that had diverted equipment intended for Afghanistan reconstruction to private buyers in Eastern Europe, a CIA financial network that had used drug interdiction funds to finance domestic surveillance operations targeting political opponents. Each investigation followed the same pattern: careful documentation, secure communication with oversight agencies, protection for whistleblowers whose integrity made them targets, and systematic exposure of criminal activities that classification had been used to hide from legitimate oversight. But the most satisfying case had involved Captain Sarah Williams, whose investigation into defense procurement irregularities had expanded into a comprehensive analysis of systemic corruption across multiple agencies and contractors. Her evidence had led to criminal prosecutions that resulted in prison sentences for over 30 individuals and corporate dissolution for companies whose illegal profits had exceeded $800 million. Williams herself had been promoted to major and assigned to a new Pentagon unit responsible for investigating procurement fraud and contractor misconduct. Her work continued the mission that had begun with Operation Silent Archive's exposure, ensuring that similar conspiracies would be detected and eliminated before they could cost lives or undermine democratic institutions. Danny Rodriguez had established a consulting firm that specialized in helping congressional oversight committees analyze complex financial networks used to hide illegal activities. His expertise in tracking weapons shipments and following money trails had become invaluable to investigators who lacked the technical background to understand how criminal conspiracies operated within legitimate government contracting systems. "We've changed the game," he told Natalie during their quarterly security review. "The people who might be tempted to establish operations like Silent Archive know they're being watched by individuals who understand their methods and have the resources to expose them." Natalie agreed, but she also understood that vigilance required constant effort. Corruption was like a virus that adapted to whatever immune responses it encountered, developing new methods and exploiting different vulnerabilities as old approaches became too dangerous to implement. The price of institutional integrity was eternal watchfulness by people who understood both the system's strengths and the potential for abuse. The conference concluded with a panel discussion on the future of government transparency, where Natalie found herself answering questions from journalists who'd covered the Operation Silent Archive trials. Their questions focused on systematic reforms and legislative changes, but she was more interested in discussing the individual courage required to expose corruption when institutional mechanisms had been compromised.
The most important factor in preventing criminal conspiracies isn't regulatory oversight or legislative reform, she told the audience. It's individuals who are willing to risk their careers and personal safety to expose activities that violate their oath of service and their obligations to democratic institutions. After the conference, Natalie returned to her vault to review intelligence reports that had accumulated during the public sessions. 3 potential cases required investigation: a defense contractor whose financial records suggested systematic overbilling, a military procurement officer whose lifestyle exceeded what his salary could support, and a private intelligence company whose surveillance activities appeared to target domestic political figures. Each case represented the kind of early warning indicators that had been ignored before Operation Silent Archive had grown into a criminal conspiracy that cost lives and undermined national security. But this time, they wouldn't be ignored. This time, there were people watching who understood what to look for and possessed the skills to investigate activities that traditional oversight mechanisms might miss. The secure phone rang with the familiar pattern that indicated an urgent communication from someone in the network. Natalie answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the professional calm that had once marked her as an exceptional military operator. Sterling Memorial Library, Special Collections. Dr. Frost, this is Colonel Martinez, Pentagon Acquisition Review Board. We have a situation that requires your expertise. The familiar rush of operational adrenaline surged through her system, awakening instincts that had been dormant during the conference presentations but never far from the surface. Somewhere, someone whose integrity made them a target needed protection. Somewhere, criminal activity was hiding behind classification and official authorization. Somewhere, the battle between corruption and accountability was about to begin again. I'm listening, Colonel. As she recorded the details of another potential conspiracy, Natalie reflected on the journey that had brought her from a quiet librarian hiding from her past to a guardian protecting people whose courage made them targets. She'd spent years believing that her most important service had ended with her departure from SEAL Team Delta, but she'd been wrong. Her most important mission had begun the day she'd decided to stop hiding from responsibilities that extended beyond personal safety to the preservation of institutions that made democratic government possible. The quiet academic who cataloged medieval manuscripts had become something more dangerous to corrupt officials than any military operator. A citizen who refused to allow criminal conspiracies to operate under the protection of classification and official authority. Outside, the Montana sky stretched endlessly above rolling hills that looked exactly as they had when she'd first arrived at Westfield University. But everything had changed in ways that weren't visible to casual observers. The Sterling Memorial Library had become a fortress, protecting not just rare books and historical documents, but the integrity of institutions that some people were willing to die for and others were willing to kill to protect. Dr. Natalie Frost, call sign Raven, former SEAL Team Delta operator, was exactly where she belonged, standing guard over people who couldn't protect themselves, ensuring that justice prevailed over conspiracy, and proving that some legends never die because the principles they represent are too important to abandon. The phone call ended with coordinates and a timeline that would require immediate response. Somewhere in the darkness, another battle for truth was beginning, and the quiet librarian from Montana was ready to answer the call. Because some missions never end, some oaths never expire, and some people never stop fighting for the principles that make freedom possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.